Morning.
I cannot. Good morning. I cannot see you.
There you go.
Goodness, how are you?
So I'm well, thank you very much. I've got it recording and I'm using an iPhone for the second time only, so I'm not sure I know how to work this as well as usual, but we can continue to talk, and as people come, we'll continue to include them.
Yes. Where are you now?
I am up in Oakland near San Francisco, just outside of Oakland, actually. I'll give you a little picture of the neighborhood I'm sitting in up in
Wow,
the
it's
hills.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's very nice.
The
It's
clouds.
very calm and easy. I'm in my truck since it's quiet, soundproofed, basically. Cars tend to be soundproof, so it gives me sort of a an easy place to sit and say hello to everybody and
Oh,
talk. So, good morning.
that is so beautiful, Jack. I appreciate this moment. Thank you, because it's a beautiful day and it's a beautiful day. It's opportunity to have something like this, a beautiful meeting, and see people that we love. That is
Yeah.
amazing. Yes, I'm so happy.
Well, your
Yeah.
enthusiasm is catching and fun to witness.
Oh, I think this is the purpose why I'm here on this planet to give this. It's inside of me. Is to give this and to love people. Yeah.
Yeah.
See?
Well, and we really share it all, and to think we don't is to think we have nothing to give. And that's a very depressing way to look at life, because it isn't life we're looking at, but the way we're thinking of it in relation to how it actually is. So
Yes.
our work
Yes.
here is like it's a chance to notice how our thinking can be misutilized and treated as though it is the source of reality, when in fact thinking is really designed to help us interact with reality in the best way. That's its real purpose. So when we're doing that in a way that would be less than that, that would certainly be undermining its purpose and point and our health and our nature and our sanity in the name of
Yes.
something that's just fully concocted in thought. So,
Yes. And sometimes I notice, Jack, that sometimes we have thoughts that they are not real. Like we have sometimes a voice who tell us, "I'm not good enough," or "I'm not going to call this person because maybe she will reject me," and that is a lie. It's totally lie. So we
well,
have
consider that that voice is speaking for that thought. And what is it saying? I am not
yes, it,
enough. It can't,
yeah,
if it isn't reality, it can't be enough to be real, which to your point is when I think it's reality, it's a lie. But when I think it's simply an image or a voice speaking for the thought I'm having, and start listening to the words that that thought is saying, repeat the words you just gave me.
yeah, we believe that sometimes, and no, 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 no. we
Repeat the
we
words that you heard that voice say.
I'm not enough. I'm not going to call this person because I will be rejected. And it is not true at all.
So let's think about those words assigned to a thought that is imagined to be real when it's just imagined. It's literally, thoughts are all imagined. They're just the ability of the brain to develop concepts around and images around and narratives around what we think, the sum total of what we think. And so if the
Yes,
thought is seen as real and it's simply an imagined idea, its benefits are not realized at all. Because if I say it's just something I'm thinking, it doesn't mean it's real. It doesn't mean what I'm getting from it is true. And if I can see that, then I can see whether or not it relates to reality in the absolute way that reality would be functional. If I can apply something that is aligned with reality, reality would confirm that application of my thinking by providing me the benefits of what I am imagining,
Yes.
rather than have me feel cut off, shut down, disconnected, unable, like I'm a loser. All those other feelings come from that reliance on the thought being reality. It isn't. So when you started by saying some thoughts aren't real, I would suggest none of them are real, because reality isn't short on reality. It isn't lacking reality. It doesn't need us to make up for it because it isn't made up. Think about it. We make up for things because the makeup of our thoughts we think are who we are.
Exactly. And it's not
And they're
true.
made up. They're
Mm-hmm.
literally
Yeah.
made up. We miss the point that our makeup is made up often. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, I would say there are probably people that look at that and see that and recognize that. And this discussion's gone on long enough throughout history. I just suspect the one part of it that seems new in my experience and in my reading is the idea that this dysfunctional use of thinking is an addiction and an illness, which is why insanity seems to be at the core of all these ideas. If I'm basing my life on things that aren't true and thinking they're true, that would be basing them on voices that I'm hearing that have no place other than the thought I have that has no substance. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
literally hearing and seeing things. I'm seeing the imagery if I can't make the call and he's going to reject me and all this stuff is going to happen. I'm actually hearing and seeing things that don't exist and wondering why I feel insane
Mm-hmm.
or seem to have
Mm-hmm.
to fight for my sanity, because there is no
Mm-hmm.
fight in sanity like there is no fight in reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Wow.
if the source of this absolute nature is love, which I would say is probably the best word to describe something that always gives all of itself, not some of
Mm-hmm.
itself, it isn't conditional in any way. So when we talk about unconditional love, we are not talking about love any more than when we are talking about unreal reality, are we talking about
Mm-hmm.
reality? And yet we don't seem to distinguish and say, well, I'm really dealing with unreal reality. But we talk about unconditional love. Well, I want to be loved unconditionally. Well, if that nature of existence is love and unconditional, we already are unconditionally loved. It's the totality of our experience right now.
Mm-hmm. And love is one of the things for our happiness as humans. Love somebody, love with our job, love everything we have around, like family or our job. That is one of the things that make the human being happy. Love, love
Well,
life, love.
if it's already the sum total of everything, including our existence, then certainly expressing that would align our actions and our thinking, meaning that our thinking is a primary action that leads to the words we use that don't happen if we don't think. Nobody's talking to themselves when they're in a coma. So the words follow the thinking, the feelings follow the thinking, and the outer voluntary actions follow the thinking. So if my
Mhm,
thinking is that I am not absolutely sourced in love and reality and truth, then I'm always seeking to do things to make up for that lack in my thinking, not reality and truth. So I can't do enough to make up for something that already exists in totality, in reality, in the complete nature of anything absolute. If I make
mhm.
believe it's like saying I'm not where I am and then searching the entire planet to find where I need to be, when in fact I was there and I'm there all along in every step I take.
Yeah.
So now the question is, if we are sourced in love, if we're sourced in reality, if we're sourced in truth, what is it that interferes with our expression of that? And I would say it's this thinking that thoughts are real, and that when we
Mhm,
think of thinking itself, which is a contemplative advantage that humans have over animals, that we've turned from an asset into a liability by making believe who we become is what we think of our thinking itself. And we think that
yeah,
self becomes myself and yourself and ourself, which it isn't. It's just an opinion. It's a conclusion. It's just a decision we've made.
yeah. That conclusion that we made. Yeah.
And the problem
Exactly.
with the conclusion we make that's not conclusive is that as soon as we make it, it completely comes apart because new experience tells us something's wrong. So feeling wrong all the
Yes.
time is generally based on an idea that we're maintaining as truth that's wrong. And to think of our thinking as true to begin with is wrong. But to think then of what we think of as true is just another undermining of our capacity to function literately, meaning not just literally, but literally in terms of the ability to read what's happening accurately, meaning the disturbances we feel, the conflicts we feel are all telling us about what we're thinking. They're not telling us about reality. We think those
Mhm.
conflicts are in reality, and there can't be any conflict in reality because it's not a divisible form of, it's not a divisible experience like our human experience is seemingly separate. And yet
Mhm.
absolute nature is revealed all around us, and that everything that's happening is always happening and everything is changing. So the thing that isn't changing is that everything's changing. And that if love abounds and is the sum total of what we have, and we keep looking for it, it shows how we
Mhm.
think that we're separate from that somehow, that we're devoid of it. And we often talk about feeling disconnected. And that would be because the thinking we're doing has no
Mhm.
substance. And if life and love is the substance of all reality,
Mhm.
then we don't need to add any substance to it. So to think of thoughts that have no substance is to make believe that we're creating reality and wonder why we feel the conflict and
Mhm.
inner turmoil and emotional turmoil and mental anguish and all those things. And they're natural byproducts. If we're reading things properly, we're reading those signs as telling us something's wrong with our thinking, not reality and truth.
Exactly. Exactly. Wow. Yes. I like to pay attention what I am thinking, what is going on around me, like my feelings, what things make me feel sad or disappointed or things like that. I like to pay attention because I I have to face things in life and I had to pay attention very well. What is going on, Lenses? What is going on your mind? Because it's very important. Like you said, our thought could be very bad for us.
Well, they're only as bad as we
Negative.
continue. Well, they're only as
Negative.
bad as they're only negative as long as we continue to think that they're positive.
Mm.
Negativity
Mm.
is negation. It's trying to negate reality. The idea that I could create reality comes with the idea that reality doesn't exist until I create it. Well, that
Mhm.
would be a lie if reality is in fact infinite, because there's nothing that needs to be created in an infinite realm since everything is already as it is, can't be anything other than that. And it doesn't change. That environment is very different than the one we seem to live as
Mm.
humans. So this being nature that we're looking at is the primary nature of our existence, and the human nature is a byproduct of that primary nature.
Mm.
And we've been holding it backward, which is how a lie works. A lie
Mhm.
is based on the idea that something that's true is false or something that's false is true.
Mhm.
And to operate that way is to say that it's exactly the opposite of what it is. So I've been largely relying on thinking as reality, meaning I've been largely lying about reality through my experience and wondering why I'm suffering. Now, I think what I'm hearing you say, and you can confirm it to me, is that when you
Mhm.
start paying attention to those thoughts, you're looking
Mhm.
for the reason you're doing these things. You're looking for the explanation that will finally resolve the problem, as though it's somewhere other than where you are. Am I
Yeah,
close
something
to
like that.
Is it so? Explain to me what you do and when you're searching.
Well, sometimes when I am facing any situation that is not pleasure there, like pleasant, I like I know I start feeling sad or disappointed, And sometimes during that time, I'm thinking something like, this is impossible. Uh, Sometimes, like, I'm not, this is not for me, or things like that. And then I still think and say, okay, Lensis, listen, this is just a moment. This is just an experience in life. I am trying to calm those negative
But
stuff, something like that.
by calming them, you're giving them credit for existing as anything other than a thought you have that isn't true.
Hmm.
You're literally giving them credit for existing rather than saying it's just a thought. There's nothing to it. It's inaccurate. It's a lie. It doesn't exist other than my maintenance of it. And one way to maintain it is to try to oppose it.
Hmm.
Now, let's go back to what you said. Good morning, Gabe, if you're in.
Morning.
Let's go back to what you said about the words that come with those thoughts. The first thing you said, if I remember right, was it feels impossible.
Yes,
Okay.
especially when I'm facing something like
Yes.
no pleasure, it's like,
Yeah.
oh no, this is impossible. This is not for me. Oh God, something like
So
that.
let me suggest to you that it is impossible because the thought you're having has no basis. It'll never come true because it's a lie. And if you don't look any further, but the experience you're having and the words that you're getting, that's the functional literacy. If you take the words that you're getting and start reading them correctly, you'll start thinking and realizing within your thinking that the thinking you're doing about that thing is wrong. And one of the ideas you have is that when you think you should get pleasure out of something and you don't get pleasure out of something, that somehow it makes you unhappy, when in fact the guidance system is telling you there's no pleasure in this thing. You're
Mm,
asking it to do and be something it isn't. And rather than read the signs and say, this is good information for me, you're thinking of it only in what you thought was real and what would come as a result of that thought. And your expectations of it have been dashed rather than saying, the information I'm getting is actually accurate about what I decided to do. And if I do that now, the whole thing just disappears because there's nothing there other than what I keep making out of it and thinking that somehow or another I need to figure out how to get pleasure out of everything. And the fact is, if I want to get pleasure out of anything, I could be standing in a burning house and die trying to figure out how to be pleasure, how to make pleasure out of that. The fact is, a lot of times we're getting very good intuitive information
mm,
and denying the value of that benefit by making
mhm,
believe all that should be happening is what we thought should happen as a result of the initial thought we had. And we think that thought is real. So we think the circumstances that come should actually fulfill the expectations we created
mhm.
rather than start to realize it's just a thought.
Yeah.
Sure, I'd love to have pleasure, but if I'm willing to get what I get, I'll start seeing what's actually happening and be able to get better at adjusting in relation to things and start finding pleasure in more things that I'm not even noticing that I already have and be grateful for things that I don't notice that I already have rather than constantly feel like I'm hanging out over a cliff trying to get something that I can't get.
Yeah, because circumstances in life always happen on
Yeah.
pleasures. They always happen. It's part
Well,
of us. Yes.
if you let them be learning experiences, which I would suggest they are, they're guiding our thinking to get it better since our thinking is in a process of evolution like our bodies are evolving and humanity is processing and either progressing or digressing depending on which way you're going, but in some way the digressions, like this idea that the pleasure you expected might not come, it may seem like a digression, but it's actually an acknowledgement that your thinking is very, very keen to what's happening if you give it credit for what it's doing rather than try to create credit or take credit for what's not happening and think that's all it should be doing while it's not doing that. If you follow that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So it simplifies it. And one of the things I have found people to do, and I have certainly done, is to search my past, go back to the time I made the thought and think that I need to now think of it as though that time is real That place is real where I had that thought, and I need to recapture what I did while I'm not noticing that by doing that, I'm denying what I'm doing right now about it. So the same thing I claim to be looking for is the same thing I'm denying now to give myself the opportunity to say, wow, it's not back there. It's what I'm thinking about that back there now. Because that back here, there is always here. It's always with us. The potential to correct anything is always where we are. The potential to be incorrect about something is always where we are. The potential for disease is always where we are. The potential for healing is always where we are. So in seeing that, I start actually saying, wow, this is valuable information I'm getting. This information of my thoughts, even having words attached to them that feel impossible, is maybe the thought I'm thinking is impossible. How hard is it to let go of a thought you finally acknowledge is impossible rather than one you think is telling you to try to create possibility out of it by denying the impossibility that it's telling you? That's what negation is. These things we call negative thoughts are trying to negate what's happening and have it replaced with new positive thoughts. Well, positive and negative come together. They're part of the same mathematical equation. Balance is the center point between the positive and the negative. If we're constantly trying to create balance by adding more positive to negative, if we just stop negating things, we'd have perfect balance because there is no imbalance in how things are. It's only in what we make of them that gives us that impression. So it's thinking again that is the source of that instability. It isn't thinking, but the thinking of thinking as truth and reality that tends to set this in motion. A lie is not a lie until we feel it's true. It's just a wrong thought. As soon as I think it's true, I think I have an obligation to fight for it, maintain it, because now my truth is threatened. My reality is threatened. My life is threatened, I think, because I become that thought. I don't become an observer of that thought. I become immersed and consumed by that thought. And there's nothing else I can do but the wrong thing until I get it right. And I seem to be on this hell-bent trail, and that misery is what people use compulsions to try to escape. Drinking, drugging, smoking, whatever it is. Love. People have love addictions. They want more love. Well, if love is infinite, we can't have any more love. But we can obviously express it in ways that are valuable within our human experience that are not conditional and start acting on that basis and seeing that there's enormous benefit in our experience that is just endless and abundant rather than this sense of scarcity and I need more and I need to get something from somebody else. That addiction that's I've got to have somebody some way to get them to do what I need is the claim that I don't have what I have. And if there's any infinite source, we all have in equal proportion all of it, not some of it. We don't have a slice of the pie. We have the whole pie shared amongst all those who are interested in eating it. And all those who aren't interested in this case. Yeah.
Yes. Wow. I understand that love is the way for us to survive. Without that, we would be, oh my
It is
God.
life. It is actually
Yes.
life. I would
Yes.
suggest. I mean, I don't want to put words in your head because we all convert what each other's saying in some way. But if you grasp the spirit of this, the words won't matter as much as the spirit of what you're saying to allow others to begin to see that there is something essential that we're talking about that isn't optional and it isn't negotiable and it isn't here and not there and it isn't there and not here. It's no place to go to get to have it. It's the place we're in that we always have it, because if it's infinite, it can't be divisible in any way. So we can't be in a place where it isn't, and we can't do a thing that it isn't. So effectively, we're just creating a hallucination of reality in our own experience and wondering why we feel disconnected from reality and disconnected from everything. And that, I would say, is the precursor to suicidal thoughts. Because all I can do is think, if I don't belong here, I don't have any place here. And that's the beginning of this idea that killing myself is going to free me from that, rather than recognizing I am not condemned at all, except to the thinking I keep doing. And because I think that thinking defines me, I think that means my whole body is responsible for it, rather than the choices I'm making to give that impression, to create that impression.
Why I would like to understand this. Why people feel disconnected sometimes? Like me. Sometimes I feel disconnected because I have many years without my family, that way that I grow, like hugs, packing, helping each other. And sometimes I notice that here in this culture, people are very distant. Not like they don't like, I don't know, they don't hug each other. They are they don't express like, I'm happy seeing you or let's have lunch. And then when people die, they made an amazing fiesta, like party to celebrate. And they say beautiful things, but that person is not here. So I noticed that sometimes I feel disconnected because I miss the kind of, I don't know, connection. I think this beautiful. Hey, Lacey, I'm happy seeing you. Hugs, and I have this gift for you, and let's go and have dinner. For example, my friends. Here is very interesting. This culture is very interesting. And
Well,
sometimes I feel this.
I would
Sorry.
imagine what you're describing happens in all cultures, but you also have a long history of being able to compare this culture to your culture so you can see those differences. I
Maybe
mean,
because I.
suicide and drug addiction is pervasive throughout the world, and alcoholism. I mean, it's all part of the same bundle of things. So if we go back to what we were starting with, that thought you had about wanting pleasure from this person and finding it was impossible to get, that thought is obviously disconnected from reality if you continue to maintain it, because the fact is you're not getting pleasure. And if you just simply say this isn't pleasant, you don't have any obligation to continue. You're free to say, oh, it's not pleasant, I'm not interested in that, I'm interested in pleasure, I'd rather have something pleasurable. And what's interesting is the lack of pleasure becomes pleasurable when you start seeing the gift it's giving you in terms of the insight you're getting. Okay, another aspect of what you're saying, and this can be a little bit to swallow, but our human experience is largely based on our sensations, our senses. And our five senses are not the limits of our senses. We've got multiple sensory capacity beyond that. Sixth sense, meaning a sense of knowing, that intuition, that sort of experiential sense that we get better at making decisions within the confines of this seeming relative confined experience we're having. So we use those to determine whether we are with people or not. And on a being level, we can't be apart from everybody, ever. So if our nature has become only human, and you hear people say, well, we're only human, it's discounting the absolute spiritual nature that is actually and absolutely our source, primary source, and having our secondary experience once again trying to dominate it, just like we have our thoughts trying to dominate reality. It's the exact same thing now on a bodily level, because if the thinking is corrupt, it's going to be corrupt at every level of our thinking. How we feel about our body, how we feel about death, how we feel about life. And I think you make a very good point that people seem to well be celebrated for attributes well beyond those that people thought of them as when they were living.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we're free to express the spiritual nature of who they are because the body is no longer there. And I would suggest that we're absolutely capable of doing that during this human life experience, but we're
Mhm.
so hung up on trying to feel like we're doing it and think we're doing it rather than see that we're already intimately interwoven with each other in a seamless, absolute way. Not even interwoven, that's even a narrative suggesting something that could be unwoven, but just a seamless, absolute way. We're already all connected in essence, in reality. And the only thing we struggle about is thinking about it in human terms, thinking about it in physical terms, thinking about those terms as being dominant rather than secondary to a primary source. So if I don't see somebody and think they're not here and they're here on the planet, I'm not seeing with my understanding things that I can't see visibly. And understanding is the way we see substance. If we know that there's hearts in people's chests, and if they're struggling with a heart attack, we got to get to the heart and do something about it because we understand the substance of the body. That's not what we normally think about when we look at a body. We look at the face and we look at the shoulders and the curves and the nature of all the variations of those bodies. We're not thinking about the blood flowing and the vitamins being delivered and the oxygen and the all the different billions and trillions of things going on in there to promote this image, to allow this image to occur. So if we're doing that with our own bodies, it's pretty easy to do it with the infinite nature of a universe that seems to be overwhelming and large. And when it comes to considering it, really isn't large because we can consider it as being universal and whole and complete, and everything that's happening is happening within it. Everything right now. So we're talking about entirely everything that's happening, including the things that aren't happening that provide the distinction for those things that are happening, that we call the difference.
Mm-hmm.
So if my nature is natural and it is real and it is true, you and I share that, not because we agreed to share it, not because we think we can't fight over it, not because we can't make ideas up that give us other impressions, but because we share it. And that's it. It's not a
Yes.
negotiable thing in that regard. It's the thinking we do about it that causes those conflicts. And that feeling of disconnection, as I suggested earlier, is actually a thought that has no substance at all. So it only lives in thought. And it doesn't even live there. It's only imagined in thought and then thought to live because we think our thinking is reality and truth, rather than just an imaginative capacity to consider things. And if those things can happen, we can make those things happen by virtue of considering them, and then in our own intuitive awareness, take the little baby steps it takes every incremental moment to do the things that would allow that thing to be realized and recognized and utilized within the confines of this physical experience we seem to be having.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We get better at
Ah.
doing that if we begin to notice that where we are, if where we are is conflicted and we think what we need to do is get over it, we're burying ideas in our seeming past that are haunting us in the present because we're pretending things that are happening within our own perceptive awareness
Mm-hmm.
are so screwed up that we don't even want them to be seen by anybody because we're so ashamed of maintaining this disruption
Mm.
and not simply admitting it's the disturbance that's admitting for me what I'm doing. It's the lack of pleasantness, the lack of kindness, it's the irritation and the instability that I'm witnessing that is reflecting that thinking I'm doing that's unstable and irritating. Is it irritating to other people? Yes, but you know who it's really irritating to? Me, my experience, because nobody's more impacted than what I think than I am. So if I've been doing it for years and years and years, thinking it's going to get better, I feel ashamed. I feel guilty for that because I'm guilty and I'm ashamed. And I feel sad because I'm mourning the loss of moments that are gone forever. And yet, what I'm really doing is diminishing the capacity of the present to do those same things in their fullness. And the light never, there is no place those things are lost forever except in my thinking. And when I start operating that way in the present, the lightness of that, both in terms of weight and in terms of brightness, becomes obvious. And all those little dark shadows cast in my thinking dissipate because I start realizing I've been here all along. I've just been thinking I wasn't. So I can think that and I can be free to think that. Doesn't mean if I feel condemned, it's the right thinking I'm doing. So if I feel condemned, I could say, okay, I'm thinking thoughts that are contemptful. They don't have any basis. They don't have any substance. And I can continue to think of them as imagination, and that has no impact. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I was talking to Tara yesterday. We did a session on Friday, and she said that when she's in a dream and knows it's a dream, she can control the dream. Okay, that's very much what we're doing in our fantasy. if we have the ability to imagine things, we can imagine great things. And it's very, I mean, talk about pleasure. There's great pleasure in imagining those things. But once I think they're real, now I begin to think I have the weight and burden of making them come true rather than seeing that the truth is in the potential of them, not in my ability to fight for them and think of them as something I have to do, but start to recognize that as long as I align with reality and I express my seeming self, if I express my actions in that direction, if I express my thoughts in that direction, much is going to happen that I never would have ever realized in the past, because I will be applying something real to reality, which will then fulfill and reckon with it in some meaningful way, some useful way, some purposeful way.
Yes. Wow. So one thing that I noticed, and it's so amazing right now, is our circumstances, experiences, bad experiences or whatever it is, had nothing to do with this beautiful present. So wow.
Well, they have to do with their thinking, which is in the
Mm-hmm.
present.
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of the present is that every possibility is always possible in the present. So certainly one of those possibilities is not to continue thinking that way and thinking that thinking more about that thing will make that thing come true. If it isn't true, it'll never be true.
Yes.
It's simply that switch. When we think our thinking is reality, the advantage and asset of imagination disappears into a liability of thinking we have to prove that reality to be true.
Yeah.
Reality doesn't need to be proven because it's already proven itself by being everything that is. So everything that's happening is the evidence of that reality. There's no proof in it. There's no fight for it. The
Yes.
idea of the universal fight for good and bad, if it's happening out there, is also metaphoric for what's happening here. And if there is a lie trying to perpetuate itself at truth, it's never going to win. But while we're here, it seems to me our experience is worthy of noting as the responsibility we have for one thing that we have freedom over, which is to make decisions.
Oh my God. That is the key. That is, I will take this from this meeting. This is the key.
Yeah. But
Exactly.
keep in mind, though, when you begin to realize that, you will see the responsibility that you have
Yes.
caused that is
Yes.
irresponsible and
Mm-hmm.
disintegrative. It meaning it undermines your whole physical. Our bodies are designed to function in health and stability, and they eventually break down and go through a transformation where they basically return all of the elements that came together to make up the life form that we're having start to fall back apart. That's natural for us.
That
If we're
is
think Go ahead.
that is amazing. You say something that break, no, not break. This is my vocabulary. Make more clear that, like, okay, I have a power to make decisions, no matter what my thought, no matter what happened in my life, like circumstances, because everyone face bad situations sometimes. But our decisions make a big difference because we can change everything with decisions, good decisions.
Well, we're changing everything with everything we think already.
Mm.
So to think we need to, that everything is waiting for us to make the right decision is a pretty big burden when we're already changing
Mm.
everything. And one of
Mm.
the aspects of looking, like I just said, if you begin to see that you are the decision maker, I don't think there's any power in decisions, because my sense is the totality of power is reality and truth. It's already on full display. It's already all that is. There's no more or less of it that can be. So I don't have to make it up. But what that choice reveals and those decisions reveal is that I have freedom. What's that? Loving. I have the absolute freedom to make whatever choice I want. Now, if I make choices that feel condemned,
Mm.
and I don't notice that it's the choices I'm making about the thoughts I'm having that are condemned,
Mm.
because they have no basis other than in imagination. They're not reality. then the experience I'm creating isn't about reality. It's simply about a delusion of reality. And delusions aren't real any more than insanity is real. The whole point of insanity is that it's insane. It isn't reality.
Mm.
So insanity only gets perpetuated when we think it's sane. Because if somebody says I'm insane while they're insane, it's like somebody saying I'm lying about the truth. They're finally by telling you they're lying, they're actually being truthful in the
Mm.
way that we use it. If they're saying this is the truth and it's a lie, that's how the lie is maintained. So for us, the lie is maintained by making believe that that conflict that we experience, or that sense of disconnect, as you described it, or earlier than that, that sense of impossibility, is actually the impossibility and the disconnect of the thought having no substance whatsoever in reality, and the only substance it has is in our imagination that it exists, when in fact our imagination is imagined.
Mm-hmm. It's not real.
So yeah, exactly. So if we can imagine imagination is reality and not notice that we're imagining reality, that's a major disconnect, right? So what are we going to feel? Disconnected. There's no substance.
Mm-hmm.
You remember fractions as a child in mathematics, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a number over a number. So it
Mm-hmm.
represents a portion of something. If the bottom has no number in it, it's zero. And I wrote a little thing about zero in the announcement today, that when zero was discovered, it allowed mathematics to begin to explain the entire universe.
Mm.
So here's nothing coming to the aid of everything to try to provide clarity for everything for everyone.
Wow.
So if that nothing that we think God is and spirit is, and because we don't see it, we don't smell it, we don't touch it, we don't, all those things, we think that it isn't real or that it doesn't exist. We miss the fact that our whole present nature of our awareness is that thing. Our
Mm-hmm.
awareness to watch our thoughts is an indication that we cannot be those thoughts, because we can't be something we're doing. And to start seeing thoughts as something we do rather than who we are makes
Mm-hmm.
what we do much more flexible, like yoga. We can do
Mm-hmm.
anything we want with those thoughts. We can adjust it in any direction we want. We can
Mm-hmm.
not have it, or we can have it. The freedom isn't in not doing it, it's in seeing that we can do it and not do it. That's where the freedom comes in, the neutrality. So if I say I
That's
don't have a
amazing.
thought, if I say my thought is true and my thought is not true, what I'm also saying is that I can't let go of this because of it being true. There's nothing to let go of. I'm actually telling you that I understand what truth is as something that can't be let go of. And yet I'm doing it with an argument to substantiate that a lie is true. So it's a little crazy making, I would say.
Yeah. It's like, oh my God. Ooh, being a human is so amazing. We have
Who's
so many things to face, to learn, to feel. Oh my God, it's like crazy. But we have freedom, and that is the key. We have
well,
freedom.
let me tell you though, that abundance isn't crazy. It's actually sanity. The
Sometimes
idea
it's
that
too
we
much.
yeah, it seems like too much, because all of a sudden we've been dumbing down our experience to claim that being insensitive as sentient beings eliminates our ability to be sensory aware of the things we're doing wrong, because we've learned to deny them so long, which is the source of
Mhm.
stress and anxiety
Yeah,
and literally an early
yeah.
death. In the
Yes.
name of claiming we're supporting life, we're causing early deaths in as much as we're stressful and anxious and in some way disordered. All of those anxious disorders are called disorders because we have reality second to humanity. It's
Mm-hmm.
out of order. We're thinking in terms of our thinking being the primary source of reality, and we have to achieve reality and get to reality and express reality rather than recognize we're already expressions of reality. That's the primary basis is spiritual. The primary basis is something that is not tactile, it's not touchable, it's not seeable, but it doesn't mean it's invisible, because its indivisibility is the present nature of our awareness in the present, that isn't based on what we see with our eyes or what we understand with our mental ability to see things clearly,
Mm-hmm.
but a basis of knowing that can't be argued with. And if we do argue with it, all we're trying to claim is that something infinite is subject to argument, which isn't true again. Can't be a
Yes.
subject to argument because it's not based in logic or reason.
I'm
Intuition.
getting, Jack,
Go ahead.
I am getting this powerful information from you. Every circumstances, every experience is good to have it. It's good to feel a little bit sad. It's good to be a little bit pain.
It's
It's
an
good.
education. It's
Why
it's
we
it's it would kind of be like going to college and thinking that we don't have anything to learn, and spend
mm,
4 years in a college saying, well, I've graduated, but I didn't learn a thing because I knew everything coming in here. This
mm,
information we're getting is present, it's immediate, it's accurate, and if we're reading it, we become functionally literate. Just like we become literate when we're able to start reading the words on a page, is sentences and paragraphs and chapters and verse, that whole thing, we become able to assimilate information. This information of our circumstances is giving us a textbook experience as a reflection of what we're doing based in thought, and to miss that point and try to make something else out of it is to deny the nature of our existence and the clarity we have, and think of it as something that condemns us rather than it's actually promoting a sense of clarity that is absolutely beyond anything we could have considered within the thinking that we had to think more about it to get there, rather than start to see it's always been telling us accurately, and we thought the best thing we could do with those disturbing feelings was run from them and start smoking and drinking and doing something to try to avoid it, rather than say, wow, I am
yes,
full of greatness, which is what gratefulness is about. Starting to express that absolute state that never changes for us, but we can make a mess out of in our own thinking, but we never make a mess of it at all, actually.
exactly. You resume life in minutes, just 1 minute. You resume everything. Yeah, the
So
mystery. I call this the mystery. We
let me make,
deny. We try to deny, to denegar existencia, existency. God,
so
that is amazing.
I want to make another point to you too, to something you said. It isn't because I say this that you know it and recognize it. It's because you know it that you recognize it. You absolutely know it. You do not have to understand my words to get a sense of this. And you do not have to construct words immediately to explain it to know it. And that begins to again reveal that thinking is something distinct from, it's something a body does in a brain. It's trying to serve the body we have. It's not trying to serve all of reality until we
Mm-hmm.
start seeing that we're absolutely all a part of reality. Now it has the chance to serve it. What are we other than that? A disservice. What does that mean? We have nothing to give anybody but destruction and mayhem and discord and disharmony. All of
Mm-hmm.
those things
Mm-hmm.
are natural byproducts of us reacting and instigating fear in others, because any amount of it they have when we're operating on that basis is magnified by our actions or reactions. So
Yes.
you can't know this if you don't know that, right? It's
Mm.
not something you've come to learn. It's something you've always known, because if it's infinite, it's not in time. So it couldn't have started sometime. It doesn't start when we finally admit it. It always has been, just like it always will be, no matter what we think of it. And start to see that thinking is very secondary to this primary knowledge. And it is actually when we're allowing the leader, the love, the God, the whatever we want to call it in terms of this infinite source, to be the leader, thinking
Mm-hmm.
follows naturally and starts operating in ways that are so abundant that we would
Mm-hmm.
quickly say, I never would have thought of this. And
Mm.
we'd be standing in face of circumstance that are so far beyond that thinking. It happens in sobriety very often. From the least
Mm-hmm.
bit of faith, from the least bit of assurance, however we concoct anything that seems to be greater than this seeming self that we're constantly trying to perfect, that's basically a
Mm.
delusion that we're trying to create and turn into reality, which is not a healthy direction to go when it comes to reality and truth. If it's already all that exists, we don't have to do anything about it to have it. To do that is not healthy, and that is a major disturbance. In any way we see that the self, that we have something beyond the self, we start looking beyond the thoughts we think we're in and realize the horizon of those thoughts that seems to be an end worth defending is actually the beginning of everything else. Just like
Mm-hmm.
the earth, when they thought the horizon was the end of doom, they didn't realize that it was the beginning of everything else, that there were countries, and not countries at that point, but there were continents and islands and all
Continent.
kinds of people. So to your point earlier, when you feel disconnected, it's like thinking that because you can't see people beyond the horizon, they're not there. And I will assure you that
Mm.
those people are there, just like your family is here. They're all, one thing we all have in common on earth is gravity.
Oh.
And they are, you are sharing with them that and all the other aspects of actual life all the time, and they're not far from you. And the
Mm.
idea that they are is this idea that when people die, they go away and they're not here anymore, rather than seeing that when
Mm.
their body isn't here, their essence doesn't go anywhere. It has no place to go because it's not based in time and space. And so what do? Like you just described, we celebrate their life. We think of them in ways
Yes.
that far exceed the thoughts we have of people who are living, who are still bothering the hell out of us because we don't like what they're doing. And in my
Mm.
experience, I know when I'm irritated by other people, I'm irritated by what I'm thinking about them, not who they are. I'm just thinking about them in this sort of characterization, this personality aspect, rather than the principled nature of their absolute awareness and knowing.
Mm.
Thinking that we're not real and based in reality is like thinking that gravity has no hold on us every time we pick up a foot to take another step, and not notice that the other foot is firmly grounded to be able to take that other step where we take that foot off the ground. That we're always grounded by that. And it's a metaphor. The metaphors in the universe are everywhere to reveal this
Mm.
absolute nature.
Mm.
We can't do anything to escape it, but we can do lots of things to give us the impression that we have. And think about impressions. The more and more and more we maintain them, they become depressing
Mm.
because it's a weight we're not designed to bear. There is very, very little weight in light, if any, which is probably why the word has a connotation, one being very, very little weight, light, and the other being very bright, light.
Zero, Jack,
Two,
zero.
Mm.
what's that, Gabe? There's no
Zero.
mass, there's no matter in
Zero.
it at all. There's no
Zero,
matter in it at all.
zero minutes. Yeah.
Zero.
Yep.
That's even better because it sort of sums up the point. I thought there was some to it because it's, from what I read, its velocity is its substance. The fact that it's always doing light speed becomes its mass.
That it has momentum is another question.
Yes, momentum.
Mm.
Oh, it wouldn't have momentum, right? If it's absolute speed, it would just be at a constant velocity or whatever
Right.
the, yeah. Interesting. Okay, well then that kind of, did you read the thing on zero today?
Yeah, I
The
did.
announcement?
It was great.
Yeah, so, but that's interesting that the idea of zero finally allowed mathematics to begin to define the universe, when in fact we think this nothingness, this inability to see something, or the inability to have this higher power, this seeming higher power, until we give it attributes that seem human, something that gives and takes, something that's sometimes there, that listens occasionally, that may or may not like us, may not favor us. Those are all human attributes that we've assigned to an infinite source that isn't based in a body. It isn't based in a relative experience. We are based in this relative experience. The same way that we thought looking out at the stars meant we were at the center of the universe. For centuries, they believed that simply because we were on Earth looking out there, not noticing, oh, it's our perspective, it's our viewpoint that is giving us that impression. But if it's an impression at all, it's depressing the longer it's maintained because it is in opposition to reality. which is impossible. You cannot, you something that's infinite when it's opposed is still infinite, which shows how this realm that we're in functions on a different basis. And yet, if you look at it in total, you'll see that it's the same. Like opposites are always connected to the opposite. They're not disconnected from. The common ground between the two is always present.
Mm.
I mean, that goes into taking positions and perfection and all that kind of stuff. If things are how they are, they're perfect. We let things be as they are, they're perfect. If you compare something to itself, it's perfect. If you begin to compare it to something else, you find more less and think of an imperfection as being that greatness or that lessness that you find. But that isn't reality doing it. It's our perceptive analytical awareness comparing it that's doing it. Again, we create imperfection in our thinking rather than notice everything is perfect on its own to begin with. And then what we do with it isn't perfect at all when we make believe that how we see it is how it is, rather than it is how it is, no matter how we see it.
Mm-hmm.
So zero is interesting because it suggests that nothing, absolutely nothing, is the source of everything. And to look at our universe, you see that everything couldn't exist very well if there weren't a lot of space between it, which is kind of a metaphor. And the amount of matter within the space that we see is tiny, 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 tiny compared to the space, like a speck of dust. And yet they're now learning, Gabe, you may be better at explaining this than I am. I'm sure that you are. Now they're beginning to realize that in that seeming nothing is more matter than there is everywhere else. So we think of matter as something we'd run into, something that blocks. And here, all of a sudden, the air that we look through, the space that we see is actually filled with more matter than all the other matter we've ever even considered mattered.
It's the human hubris that if we can't see it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, yeah.
It is
And that's
normal. It is normal to have an
to be
idea,
insane.
like, because sometimes we don't see and we think that doesn't exist, something like that.
Well, think of how clever we are to simply think that if we don't see it, it doesn't exist. Think of how that supports the idea that thinking is reality. It's a very narrow view of reality because we're trying to make it our own so that we can be distinguished in our body and wonder why being distinguished and distinct feels lonely. Because we're asking to be apart from everyone rather than a part of everything. Our eyes, you know, what's interesting about our eyeballs that see is they cannot see themselves.
Really?
Well, think about it. Have you ever looked at your eye with your eye? No.
No. Well,
You always,
if I close my eyes, I can see something with my imagination.
yes, exactly. Right. So
Yes.
so looking at your eyeball can't see itself. And when we look in a mirror and think that's my eye, in fact, that's an image of my eye. We're doing in the mirror exactly what we do in our brain. When we have an imagined thought, we think it's reality. It's the same as we do when we look in a mirror and say, that's my eye, rather than saying that is an image of my eye. And the beautiful irony of looking in a mirror is you see everything backwards.
Wow.
If you put writing, put a book up to the mirror and you'll see that it's all backwards. So isn't that
Yes.
interesting that the idea of a lie being truth is backward? This is the opposition to reality, thinking that somehow opposing it could be truth. In an infinite state, the opposite of it is the same. Doesn't change. It only does that in our human. We're confirming the human source of the problem by seeing it in human terms, not in absolute terms. And understanding, again, is how we see substance. It's how we recognize people's characteristics. We watch their actions, we determine their intent. We see those things visibly, but we understand that there's a depth there coming from something that we're not always able to see, but we can see it through the expressions and the circumstances we have with them. Doesn't mean that we're
Exactly.
right. Doesn't mean that we're right. But to know that
Exactly.
there's substance and just stop there and say there is substance to everything. And that substance is the same substance that we all share. It may be operating on slightly different variations, but the platform of that potential is all absolutely shared by all of us. Now we have everything in common. We have nothing in uncommon, and there's nothing uncommon about nature and health and normal and sanity. It's actually becomes common sense, actually becomes common, while we've been referring to common sense as the least common thing we tend to witness. We say, well, that just doesn't make sense. Of course it doesn't make sense, because nonsense can't make sense. Something that makes no sense won't make sense because it has nothing to make of it. It's, again, nothing acting as though it's everything. That is not the same nothing that we're talking about in terms of zero, because zero apparently is a source of relating to you may, again, Gabe, be better at explaining this, but the introduction of zero to mathematics, and I remember reading the book about zero written by a guy probably 10 or 12 years ago. And it was pretty fascinating to see how many humans resisted the whole concept of zero because they thought it was black magic and voodoo and satanic and devilish because it could eliminate numbers. You could multiply a number by zero and it would disappear, and they thought that was magic.
Yeah, it's a funky concept, as infinity is, the flip side of that.
Exactly. So it may be the same thing. It may be the metaphoric physical realm
Nothing and
is
everything.
actually, yeah. Well, and seeing nothing isn't some things, and then seeing that nothing is in fact something, not in a thing way, but in an essence. It isn't thing bound. It isn't it. It's an is of isness. It's some sort of isness. It just exists, and it is existence.
Knowing, Jack.
Yes. Yes. So that awareness is absolute, and it's not a thinking problem, or it's not a thinking construct. It isn't constructed at all. It's just a natural state of ever-present knowing awareness, being at its source. Nothingness is everything, effectively. Which suggests, I would suggest, this is a big leap, but that our universe is very small relative to that. As a matter of fact, so small, it is nothing more than a thought, nothing more than a conscious endeavor, nothing more than a projection of consciousness. So it seems real, just like dreams seem real. I was getting to this earlier with Tara. We talked about this the other day, and she was talking about lucid dreams, which I'd never heard the term until that week. She mentioned it, and somebody else had mentioned it to me about what they were doing to try to, I think it was Joe Dispenza or somebody who was sort of promoting this idea of documenting your dreams so you can be more conscious in them. But what happens in dreams where we know they're dreams is we become capable of doing things that we can't seem to think we're capable of doing on Earth, like flying, lifting off. But when we think we're in the dreams, that's where the potential for nightmares is, because we think we can't get out of the dream. And they tend to be filled with horror, just like our daydreams seem to be filled with self-centered fear, loathing, low self-esteem, low self-worth, feeling of disconnected, anguish, struggle, conflict, insanity, when we make believe our thoughts are true and real rather than imagined. We're in a daydream thinking we're wide awake. We're not. When we're thinking that all we are seeing is what we think, rather than what we are seeing is the sum total of everything that exists. And it doesn't come from our eyes. It's a seeing that is a much greater, the third eye concept, the sixth sense concept, all those seemingly extra sensory perceptions. But I would say they're only extra in relation to the dumbing down and the desensitization that we've been so busy doing for so many years to try to make believe that if we don't feel what's wrong, it isn't wrong. Rather than, as Lenz has pointed out, when she said, oh, this is a good education, this is good information, this is fulfillment. I don't have to worry about whether I like it or don't like it. I don't have to worry about whether it's good or bad. I can simply say, thanks. Wow, that's good information for me to have. And that's your knowledge point and intuition. We know we're aware, and to act otherwise is simply a choice to diminish our capacity as humans and make believe that diminished capacity proves we're great, which is arrogance and hubris and pride and all of the things that go along with that. One other point that came up the other day, and I know it's come up with us, is semantics. So I did a little reading about semantics this week, and just to understand a little better from its root. Often in this conversation, people say, well, my thoughts are my reality. And I said, well, no, actually, your thoughts aren't your reality. Reality's reality. And they'll say, well, that's just semantics. And semantics, in fact, is the natural evolution of words and their meanings. And they do change. We use them differently. And over time, words take on different connotations. But it is not a semantic issue when you're claiming that reality is not reality, or that truth is not truth, or that a lie is true. That is not a semantic change. That's an absolute opposition to the whole point of language, meaning, purpose, usefulness, in the name of making believe that we can make up our own. Which we certainly can, but it doesn't mean it's sane. It doesn't mean it's useful. It doesn't mean it's functional. So, as I said earlier to Lensis, it isn't what I say, it's the spirit that we all have, that we each have the potential to notice, to reckon with, to begin to express. And the words we use will always be different in their own variety of choices and all. We all have different ways of expressing ourselves and different levels of ability to be vocal and utilize vocabulary. But again, when we're thinking of things in the exact opposite and thinking that's semantic, that's again an abuse of the word to make it seem normal to do that, when in fact it's an outright violation of the whole point and purpose of language. And language is one of the fundamental aspects of human capacity. And it isn't because animals don't have language, they just don't speak like we do. They speak other languages, they interact differently, they make different sounds, and we think they don't have language. They absolutely have language, and they're all communicating all the time. So I offer that for two reasons. Each of us have the right to choose to think what we want. There is nothing I can say that anybody has to swallow, digest, agree with, have faith in, trust, have hope in, or accept. Nothing, absolutely nothing. It's just proposed as an opportunity to consider that we may already know everything there is to know. We may already have a sense of awareness that's well beyond anything we ever thought, because of this over-reliance on thinking about thinking as being our only source, and all the mayhem that seems to create so much stress that we need to be worried about it all the time, when in fact to continue to be worried about it is to continue to maintain the thinking that's wrong about reality and truth. So we each have that choice independently. Nobody can make it for us. Nobody is capable of telling you what to do and having you do that without agreeing at some level, even if you blame them to justify doing what you're doing. Each of us has that freedom. And in sobriety, nobody gets sober until they decide they have a problem. Same issue. It's not until somebody sincerely admits that they have a problem and they have not been able to do anything about it that the door seems to open, when in fact what's really opened are their eyes to seeing a problem that they have been defensively, delusionally, defiantly in denial of, thinking somehow, someday that defense will work and overcome it, and I'll figure out how to do it with abandon, rather than simply abandon the idea there's anything to do with it, and start to see the freedom and the potential of everything they ever dreamed that drug or that compulsion would provide is already readily available in an amount that's infinitely greater than the limited ideas we had about that promise that we would eventually get, when in fact, if the thinking is broken, the promise is always going to be broken. We're never going to get it. Each of us have free will in terms of the choices we make. It doesn't mean that everything we are free to choose to think is going to happen. But when it doesn't, the consequences we're facing are actually telling us what's wrong about the thought. not to condemn us, not to criticize us, not to separate us and call us an idiot and all those other things that we've attached to that kind of thing when other people say things that are contrary to what we're thinking, because we think who we are is what we think and think our personality is based on that. And if anybody says anything contrary to that, we're offended, when in fact we're fully defensive to be maintaining those ideas as our reality and as our personality, being who we actually are, rather than just a concoction of thoughts we have about who we think we are. We're free to choose. And that means we're so free that we can choose to kill ourselves in the name of thinking that it's the only thing left to do to stop the misery that we create in our thinking, rather than to begin to realize that it's as easy to stop this. It's easier to stop this mentally obsessive thinking than it is to continue. But the stopping will never stop until we admit that we are the starters of it, until we see that we are the ones causing it, that we are the responsible party for launching in directions that are impossible to ever fulfill. And then thinking our job, because of all the discord and everything else, is to run from the discord rather than take it as good information that what we're doing is discordant and maligned and disconnected. And thinking we'll get it better if we just keep denying it and feeling less about it and going numb to it. Numbness is not the absence of pain, it is an indication of pain. Pain is an indication of something wrong, not a proof of reality. Our bodies are telling us something's wrong with the discord we feel, the disturbance we feel. So if we have that beautiful network available to us and we abuse the thinking about it, feeling abused is going to come naturally, because it's what we're doing that's causing that. Nobody can affect us greater than the immediacy of the thinking we do that is immediately connected to the pain and pleasure zones in our experience. Nobody can get closer to us than that. Nobody ever can get into our brain, except to the degree we think about what they're thinking in ways that condemn us in our experience. And it's not really us that's condemned, it's simply our experience, because what we manifest in our thinking is our experience of what we call life, but in fact, it's just a manifestation of thought, how we think of things. The surrender is simply admitting, if you've tried and tried and tried and tried and tried, that maybe what you're doing is wrong, and just sit with it. Live with that for a day or a week. If you've been living with the misery for years, you can certainly live with the idea that you may be causing it for a day or a moment, and start to see that even considering it, while it can be daunting to come to that point, is also freeing, and realizing that the freedom of it is not the stopping of it. It's simply choosing not to restart it over and over and over and over again, hoping one day it'll lead to something we don't want to stop, because it will create a reality beyond our wildest dreams. When if we're dreaming about reality, reality is already beyond our wildest dreams right now, by far, by amounts that can't even be calculated in numbers that haven't even been determined at this point. There is no hope in a lie. There is no faith that can, as much faith as we can give a lie, it will never be enough. As much faith as we can have in a lie, it will never be enough. As much trust as we have in a lie, it will never be enough. All these things we think of as things we need to have in relation to an infinite source are not true. If we have any faith at all to come to terms with the fact that reality has always been real, and that essence of reality has always been true, it takes a moment of faith and then an absolute confirmation in your experience that you've always known that presence, and that presence is the source of your existence, not some byproduct to get to, or to find, or to seek, or to journey, or to try to get, but actually the one you've always had, because it isn't something you could ever be without, nor would it ever be without you and still be infinite in any way. We're all part of it. There's great peace in that, because there is no disruption in it, because something that doesn't change has no conflict whatsoever. There is no fight. There is no opposites. It's just a seamless, absolute present knowing. And I will suggest, as preposterous as it may sound, and if it sounds preposterous, that will give you some concept of the thinking you're doing that's preposterous. It is actually your experience right now, right here, as it is. And it's only that way because we're human. We think in those terms, in terms of spatially, here and now. Here and now isn't the presence of the presence because there is no here or now in something that isn't bound by time and space. So it's only that way for us. We think of now and here again to the nothing thing. Now and here combined is nowhere.
Mm.
Our own language tells us these things, and it's easy to overlook and easy to see all the other reasons to use language to try and separate and isolate and fight and oppose rather than start to see that we're actually talking in ways that are actually much more intuitive than we might otherwise see because we don't want to see the things that would undermine the insanity we're trying to perfect. There is no sanity in insanity, and it is perpetuated by thinking it's sane. Insanity is insanity, disappears. Like a lie is no longer a lie. You may have more to offer in the nothingness aspect of this. Okay.
Well, let me challenge you on free will.
Sure.
I was listening to a YouTube debate between Ben Shapiro and Alex O'Connor, these two guys. One of them came to use the word, I can't remember the exact phrase, but it was like decision-making being or being decision or something like that.
Right.
That our decisions are not completely, void and start from nothingness to make a decision. That our environment, our hereditary stuff and everything comes to bear
Mm-hmm.
on our decision makings, unless it's not completely free.
Right.
Wanted your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, again, historically, we have thought of our experience as human. So we think of it where it starts, and then our experience is only the sum total of everything we've done and interacted with that then becomes the source of those limitations, which would be correct if all we were was human. But if we have an intuitive knowing sense, that knowing sense is not bound by circumstance. It's not bound by time. It's not bound by space. It's an absolute knowing of knowing. And if that is the reliance that we have and the dependence that we have, because it's inescapable, because it's the nature of our existence, it's only making believe our experience is limited to our thinking that gives us the impression that our will is limited to that evolution of thought. So intuition by nature is described as knowledge beyond reason, effectively. There's no reason for it whatsoever, meaning there's no thought in it whatsoever. So if I'm thinking in terms of human thought, I am desperate to some degree to get it right because I think it's all I can do, which again leads to this idea of addiction. But if I know that my knowing is absolute, my thinking now starts to express the absolute nature of my knowing that isn't based in experience and limitations, but based in an absolute abundant nature that isn't even, we call it natural, but it wouldn't even be unnatural. So it's not even a word that can sum it up. It's just a seamless knowing and awareness that is so far beyond what any terminology can ever address, but we can talk about the futility of addressing it within the bounds to suggest that it's something so primary and so essential that it isn't even, that words can't do it justice, and yet we can reference it in the words we use as something. If we know it, then we know it. Like our eyeball knows that it's an eyeball, so when we open our eyes, it sees. It doesn't argue. It doesn't say, well, I don't think I'm an eyeball today, and I don't think I can see. So you're going to have to go blind for the day until I resolve this issue. Nature seems to do what it is designed to do very, very well, without argument. So if we're acting in terms of our actual nature, that knowingness would be the present nature, and it would not be despair that we're operating from. It would be inspiration, because the spirit of a spirit would be inspirational. So it definitely changed the outcome. And again, like I said earlier, it's the kind of thing where you say, did I just do that? Did I just say that? I never would have thought to say that. Start to realize that actually we're operating, and we've all done it. We all do it and then discount it as some strange confluence rather than begin to acknowledge that it's actually a bit of a premonition and in awareness that we're relating and operating on, and we're not always respecting it because we don't respect the volatility we create. Why would we start respecting the enormity that we're capable of?
You still
So
feel
maybe
that we have
maybe
every,
that's an answer.
no, it's a long answer, but I don't think you answered it. That is an answer, but I don't think it's the answer. You feel like we have literally an infinite choice?
Well, if the infinite is infinite, could it be possible that we're not part of that knowing?
No, I understand that logic, but
All right, but then
I
think
could,
about that. That's
yeah,
what freedom is.
okay.
That's what freedom is. And
I
what
think
is
you're
will?
talking about the pragmatics of, and even to the point of drinking addiction or addiction thought or whatever, like I could leave my family, my job, and just empty the bank account, go to Vegas and drink myself to death like Nick Cage.
Mhm.
Um, that's a choice
In the movie,
in the movie,
not
not
in.
in reality.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Again, talking about dreams versus
Yeah,
reality.
yeah, but
Uh,
it's not a choice. I'm free to make that. You think I'm free to make that choice, but I would say that there's some driving forces in my past, in my present, thinking about the past and all of that negates some of that possibility. I don't know. Just these are just
well,
thoughts.
you're probably right. I mean, it doesn't mean that we can't think thoughts that condemn us to seeming limitations, but if they're delusional, how real are they? That's the big question.
But my love for
And
my kids is real, I guess I would say,
well,
that
but love is real for all of us to begin with, and they are as much of that as you and I are. So yes, that would be natural. Now, the
yeah.
expression of that love probably varies, and you probably wonder whether you did enough or should do enough or do more for one because you did more for the other. I wouldn't say that's love. I would say that those are the conditional aspects of decisions we're making.
Yeah, they came down to like decision beings. We're decision beings, free to
Yeah.
make free to make any decisions, but based
Yes.
on our current, you know, our all the things you talk about, all of humanity coming up to today's point of um, making decisions based
But
on.
you're kind of discounting the fact that we don't know the absolute freedom of not knowingness by thinking of it as something theoretical and outside the bounds of this limited thought. That's exactly what addiction would typically have us do when we think that drinking is the only thing we can do and smoking crack and doing meth is the only thing we can do. That isn't a real limitation. That's a self-imposed, self-induced state
What
that
was the
isn't a
beginning of
limit.
that sentence, Jack? What was the beginning?
It seemed to me that you were pushing aside this absolute nature of nature, the absolute infinite nature, and then jumping back into saying, well, you didn't really answer the question because you're not limiting it to the limitations that would warrant the idea that we don't have self-will, that it's
Yeah,
only choice,
so
it's only
that's
decision.
that's kind of where Ben Shapiro says there is God.
Yes,
Um, so
good. I like
because
well, I like Ben's words in that regard.
I mean, Ben is very good. He's a conservative Jewish commentator and blogger, and he's very smart. And um, I may not agree with everything he says, but he even uses the words mystery. If you don't want to use God or you don't want to use that, it's the mystery he uses that therefore, when you come to that conclusion of what you just described on your own volition, that
Yes.
it it takes you out of this reason and logic.
Well, again, though, even in your
Or
words, you're
history.
suggesting we're in it.
Yeah.
It's something we're doing. It's not something we are. And when we think we are it, we feel like we're in it. And when we're in it, we don't think there's anything beyond the bounds, because the bounds begin to define the limitations of our thinking. They become the defensible aspect of our life that we're fighting for, which is personality before principle. The principle is that everything is already everything, and the actual limitations of any thought are the beginning of everything else, just like the horizon is not the end of the world, it's the beginning of the rest of the world and all the people in it and all the things in it. So it's really, a lot of the arguments philosophically are mired in the presumption that all we are is human, and that spirituality, because it can't be proven in a scientific method, when in fact it's constantly proven, it just is ignored. The impossibility of proving it is the possibility of seeing it, because it's taking it beyond the bounds of rational constructs and logical restraints, and starting to see that there is no logic in it and there is no reason in it whatsoever. So it's completely unreasonable, it's totally illogical, and completely preposterous to thinking. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means that within the confines of thinking is all that exists. It seems preposterous and all those things. And that to me is the admission of its existence, because it wouldn't seem preposterous if those bounds of seeming reality were real. We would just say, well, that's it. There's no question here. Why are we even talking about it? Why has this been discussed for thousands of years if it didn't exist? It's interesting that it exists in the debate and is thought not to exist in reality. Again, we want to take credit for creating it and coming to terms with it before we're willing to concede it's there. Just like people want to try to manage their drinking as long as they possibly can before they finally say, I can't manage this. Everything I do to manage it is a mismanagement program, and it never works. So this is precisely what this discussion is about, to begin to actually interact on a level of beginning, not even a level, but with an awareness that our awareness is intact. It's here now. If we can do anything to begin to dispel the rumors we've been perpetuating and recognize the sort of euphoria and the elation that comes from that momentary freedom of seeing those things vanish because we're no longer maintaining them, it's often hard to give credit to the stability that's created, because we're also beginning to expose ourselves to the enormity of the cultural ideas and the ideas that we feel are true. As we become aware of them, it becomes depressing at points, because we begin to see the weight of this thing we've been doing has been profoundly affecting us, not just casually, occasionally interfering with our peace and quiet and our enjoyment that we've been so chronically trying to maintain as cover.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my sense is it's not the reality isn't a mystery at all. It's that we think it isn't real that's the mystery, and we keep compounding that day after day, moment after moment, with new thoughts about it that we think are going to someday prove reality is true, when reality needs no proof. There's no risk to it whatsoever. It has no beginning or end. It doesn't function in the relative world that we function in. And so any application of that functional capacity we've developed rationally has no bearing on it whatsoever. Only our experience is impacted. And our interactive or interreactive interaction are affected by the dramas that we create and the manifestation of circumstances that we make, that are perfect mirrors of what we're thinking. And I mean, on the broadest sense, is humanity doing everything, rather than just the local things of your neighbor and your wife and the kids and all that kind of stuff. That's the small local part. The rest, that's the domestic part. The rest of it that seems foreign is also domestic too.
But I like scotch and orgasms, damn it.
Well, I wouldn't say those would be reduced, but perhaps the euphoria that you're thinking about. Here comes Katie walking up the hill. This is about a mile up the hill. You guys can see her, I think.
Yep.
No?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. She's so tiny. I'm giving everyone a full frontal view.
I thought you were taking a picture. I don't know.
It's not a picture. You're just exposed to the Gabe and Ty and Anthony and Lenses.
I gotta choose the filter.
See you, baby.
Bye. I'm gonna go for a while.
Have a good walk. Okay.
Bye.
You have your phone?
Yeah.
I'll let you know when I'm done. So you still there?
Yeah. All right.
Okay. I keep bumping things that if we are in the presence of the present and we are absolutely without interruption aware and know, and we think we're not, it's thinking that's causing the issues that seem to be so insurmountable because we keep relying on it to try to get us there rather than concede we're already there now. And just like an alcoholic, drug addict, et cetera, as we talked about, coming to terms with that is to really swallow a chunk. This chunk is swallowing the totality of what humans have done in the name of themselves and their self and their personalities and their characteristics as an excuse for claiming reality isn't real, and that what they need to get is better personality, better characteristics, refine these things they do, rather than see that reality is already the basis of everything. And the principal basis of our reality is reality. And to start seeing it that way begins to correct the same things we think we need to perfect in the idea of thinking more about thinking naturally, because we start operating on a basis that's absolutely functional. In the best of ways, because we start seeing the dysfunction clearly, we can start adjusting accordingly, just like a sailor at sea finally trimming the sails to get where he's going because he'd been afloat without the sails up for days, wondering why he wasn't getting any closer to port. We think this anchor doesn't exist because we think we don't see it, like it's underground, like any anchors below the surface would cause havoc to a sailor if it was dragging on the bottom of the ocean. Our subconscious is used to pretend we don't know what we're doing when we're witnessing the effects of it and denying those effects have anything to do with us. Maybe we don't know what we're thinking in our subconscious, but I guarantee you we know the effects. And if we know the effects, we actually know the thinking. We're witnessing them daily. We're trying to negotiate them daily. We're trying to get them better daily. We're fighting to get them right rather than surrendering to the idea that they're already right. We're already right. If the functional basis of the universe is reality and truth, there is no better reliance that we could possibly have than the one we already have. Not the one we concocted, not the one we thought up, the one that provided the possibility for us to exist and think. Much more primary than just our lifetime or our lifespan, the beginning to the end. Talking about it is a bit of a trick, given that we haven't. There's not a lot of language developed around this to speak to it in ways that I would think are simple enough and conceptual enough to begin to pass that understanding on in ways that people say yes right away. But my sense is that may never be the case. It may never be definitive enough until people begin to recognize that it's been their choice all along to make the choices. My sense is, Gabe, that will is our choices. It's expressing the will of want. It's a desire. We just want something. So we will to want things. That's what will is. When we think we are our thoughts, that's what self-will is. All I am is what I think, so I have to have the thing I want. What is that? That's an addiction. All I want and all I want and all I want is more, 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 more. It's never enough because it's trying to fill a void that can't be filled because it's imagined to be real that isn't actual reality. On the other hand, reality is already fulfilling because it's the sum total of everything. We don't create reality in life, we manifest effects based on the transformation of reality, existing reality. However it is, when we change it, we think we make that thing up. All we've done is changed it, transformed it. That's what would be acting on our will, wanting something. I want to realize something, so I go and seemingly create it, when in fact what I'm doing is making it up out of existing reality, out of existing materials, out of existing essence. I'm making shapes, making forms. Any other thoughts?
No, that was good.
And keep in mind too, Gabe, this isn't a telling you of anything because there's nothing I can tell you if you already know. But it is often sounds to me like a plea because I get so hungry to convey this as though it's up to me and my choices to do that. I like talking about it. I don't always probably sound like I like talking about it. I probably sound more like I like telling everyone about it. But the point is, in that regard, I've never done this honestly and accurately enough to know exactly what to do in terms of my functional capacity because I still rely on a lot of ideas and thoughts that aren't true, a lot of them that would like to take credit for this, a lot of them that are just not based in anything that are worth conveying. So there's a falling apart in the process and a reckoning with the fact that the inability to discuss it often is actually the limited ability to put words to it. And in one sense, at the extreme sense, we don't need to say anything about it for it to be true at all. But my sense is we are not struggling with reality any more than we ever struggle with love. What we're actually struggling with are our thoughts of reality and our thoughts about love. And if we have a functional capacity based on that reality and that love, we would be better as humans, better achievers, better producers, better effectors, people who create effects, better result oriented doers by beginning to stand on a foundation that's absolute, the one we've always stood on, but stand on it within our thinking context and begin to say, oh, that is in fact the source of my knowledge, and I'm going to begin to rely on it rather than the perpetual regurgitation of thoughts over thoughts over thoughts over thoughts over thoughts and wonder why I get sick and tired and feel repetitive and feel disconnected and feel apart from and feel unable to and feel things are impossible, feel life is impossible when it's the impossibility of my thinking that I'm actually feeling. So I could be perhaps a better human in a functionally literate way that is interesting enough for people to say, oh, if that's his nature, that's my nature, and that's our nature. And the sooner we talk about it as being our nature, the sooner nature may appreciate the things we do with it, rather than have us wonder if it's going to survive while we're imposing overuse and toxins and all kinds of other things on it and struggling to imagine whether we're going to be able to survive as a result of nature surviving. And there are some major concerns about that today. Right or wrong, I don't know. I don't take the position. I just recognize the occurrence that it's happening. So I suspect there are plenty of wrongs because you can't have corrupt thoughts and not take corrupt actions. So there's probably plenty of toxins out there that are reflecting the thinking we've been doing, and the maintenance of them is the maintenance of the thinking about them that we don't think we're doing anything, which would be one way to promote that idea and continue to perpetuate it, which we've been good at. So I guess in one way, I have a pretty high confidence level in the fact that we are not only aware of what we're doing, but we're actually doing the thing we're claiming we may not be doing. I just don't know to what extent. I would say to the extent that it's happening. That might be clear enough and not have to get into the weeds over it. Any other thoughts? Considerations? Opposition? Appreciate this. Many of you have done this for some time. Lensis is fairly new. Ty is newer, but has been around a long time in terms of sobriety and has a long history. We've gotten to know each other a lot better over the last year or so, and maybe a year and a half. I appreciate being able to have the conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to have it broadcast so that other people can listen and begin to consider what is possible for them to do. And my sense is, if we're talking about this at all, we're beginning to develop a conversation that does not replicate the reactive, defensive, offensive, sick conversation that we've been largely doing in humanity, to imagine all we're doing is all that we are is what we're thinking, and what we need to do is think more about it and talk more about it to help undo it, when in fact we're redoing it and reinforcing it by doing that, and start to actually unravel some of that stuff. It isn't easy to talk about this with a lot of people. In my experience, it was very reactive at first, but I realized the reactivity was actually giving me a clear sign that I was dealing with people. I was finding their reactivity and they were willing to express it with me and bring it into the open. And that the reactivity wasn't something I should avoid, but something I should look at to confirm the idea that that defensiveness exists amongst us,
Mm-hmm.
or at least it appears to exist in the manifestations that we create in our bodily functions or dysfunctions.
Mm-hmm.
So in talking about it, you can probably expect to find some of that. And it doesn't mean that the source of that individual doing that is wrong and bad and all that. It means that what they're thinking may be those things. So their essence is in absolute perfect condition and order and complete and whole. And what they're thinking about it is what they're struggling with. When you begin to see that in other people, it becomes a lot easier to allow people that space, because it becomes a lot easier to notice that they're doing exactly what I see as I did for a long time and still do whenever I encounter the limits of my thoughts that I make believe are true, and find myself defending them in some way or feeling offended by people who aren't conceding my thoughts. If they're not conceding my thought, there's a good chance my thought is not right. And it might be worth admitting that sooner than later than constantly destroy relationships over the idea that someday I'll get better by having less and less people close to me, when in fact there's now 8.5 billion people. It's sort of hard to avoid them. So that's my sum total for the day, I think.
Wow, Jack, thank you so much. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for coming a little early today, Lensis, and getting started.
It's my pleasure to be here. I appreciate a lot this moment. Wow. Mm-hmm.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Me too.
Because I can feel the aceptación, love, understanding, and it is beautiful to have that sometimes. Hearing that is good, it's important. So, and I feel that. I feel that.
Yeah. Well, that sense is the ultimate awareness of that presence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's present tense. It's not past, it's not future, it's always here now. It's just noticing that we have an absolute awareness of peace. And my understanding at this point is that we wouldn't know suffering if we didn't know peace, because we have something to compare to, an absolute peaceful state of being. We're aware of something wrong when the disturbances begin, and that's all I want to be aware of. I notice when I feel conflicted and I take a breath. And generally,
Mm-hmm.
there's emotion attached to that, sadness and discord and all kinds of things that I've been denying. But it has a chance to be expressed, and I start seeing more of what I was thinking in the present, not as though it was in the past, but I begin seeing the ideas that I've held on to moment to moment to moment. It becomes a little more obvious that I've been grieving the inability those thoughts have created, because I've maintained them, not like the thoughts are acting despite me, the thoughts are acting in my direction, but I've diminished my capacity with the people around me, and I've grieved for those moments. I've hurt during those moments of being unable to convey my actual capacity in the name of thinking I'm doing the best I can do by fighting for some narrow view, and diminishing my expression and my ability to convey to somebody that I love them, or I appreciate them, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm so grateful for them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you kind of kicked it off today on a Super Bowl Sunday, leading into a Super Bowl Sunday. You kicked the ball off.
Yes.
This is a football country, so in your terms, it would be soccer.
Mm-hmm. Football, yeah.
Yeah, and they call
Wow.
it football. Here, football is done by hands, and you can't touch it with your feet, except for the kicker. But anyway, I appreciate y'all very much, and love you, and want to continue, and look forward to whatever we do together, which is everything all the time, but it's also this interactive capacity, I think, is something that helps me develop, I believe, at least it seems like it, getting a little better talking about it and bringing it out into the public and talking about it further than just the scope of this hour or 2 hours that we spend every week. Starting to talk about it where I walk and where I talk and where I speak and along the way during the day. And it's interesting because I'll say things sort of off the cuff to people, meaning I don't really plan. It just comes out of my mouth and people laugh. They're like, oh, that's interesting. And it's fun to engage with people I don't seem to know and yet realize they know what I know and we know each other. And I don't have to have ever seen them before for that to be true. So
that
anyway.
is the same feeling that I feel when I came to this meeting. It's like that. We are having an experience we are having an experience of human beings. We are that way.
Yeah, we are being human as human beings. So it's a potential that's great, and the problems we've created are small compared to the capacity we have. And to think of it in those terms is to begin to use, to Gabe's point, begin to use the basis of our knowing as the basis of the choices we make, rather than make believe that by getting stuck in some loop of thought, our only choice is to choose from that loop. And I know that that's what we do when we're sick, but it doesn't mean that other potential isn't there. And it doesn't mean we don't know it's there. It means that we are in a delusional state of insanity, making believe that all that exists is this repetition of thought, and all that things are is what we think of them. And all that our life is about is conflict and pain and suffering. And as a result, there's no more to it than that. And there's nothing else we're ever going to be able to do but that. So we just continue slogging on or use compulsive behaviors. All compulsive behaviors are suicidal tendencies. Every one of them is having us do something that is not healthy for us. Every single one of them. We're killing ourselves slowly and softly, thinking it's not obvious, so we're not doing it. And again, it feeds this whole thing about appearance rather than reality. How does it look rather than how it is? So think about those things during the week and contemplate those things and do what you do, and come back next Sunday. Let's talk about what the feedback is that you're getting, what the responses are that you're getting, what the struggles you are that you're having. And to me, that will build this conversation as an example of what people can do elsewhere rather than one-on-one. One on all, one with all. We can all start talking about this on a much broader basis and see that the fruit is immediate. It's born immediately because it doesn't have to go through the whole gestation period like we do as humans. It just happens. Boom, boom, boom. It's already here. It's already now. It's already everywhere we are, everywhere we go. It's not something we can escape. It's not something we can achieve. It's not something we can seek and find because it's never been lost. It is as it is, and we are as it is. And that is a pretty good end point for a new start. See you guys and gals.
Jack, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
You
Jack.
bet. Thanks, Ty. Love you guys.
Yep.
I love
Gabe,
you.
thanks
We
for your
love you.
insight.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you.
Love you. Bye, Anthony.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Jana.